All right. So again, thank you everybody for being here. This has been a huge uh, labor of love work, thing that I've been working on for the last, if you count everything I've been doing for many years, but this particular project has been for a couple of years. It's called Waves of Focus, Guiding the Wandering Mind. And uh, basically, I want to describe some of the troubles that I've seen a lot of people have in terms of getting on top of things, and some of the ideas that are going to be going into this course and how I've kind of arranged it. And hopefully, if you decide to join me on this, this would be helpful to you. So I think a lot of people have struggles. They have trouble with the inbox. They have trouble with their lists. They have troubles with their focus. People are having troubles with any number of these things. And they're often told that they're quite creative, that they're smart. They know this themselves. Somewhere, somehow, though, there's this feeling of blame because they can't get on top of these things. So they feel there's something wrong with me. Sometimes they find some way to get a diagnosis, or it doesn't even have to be that. It could be that they're very bright and they're very curious. It could be that they're anxious. It could be that there's any number of ways that somehow the rubber doesn't hit the road. It's not moving forward. There are many differences and uniquenesses to each person. And I've never seen two people with the same issues, but they keep running into the same wall. There we go. And I call the center of this a wandering mind. I think everybody has some degree of this. There's a saying, a Zen saying, that if you have a mind, it will wander. But I think some people have more than others. Some carry anxiety, ADHD. Others have histories of trauma. As I mentioned, there's any number of ways to get here. But I like this concept of a wandering mind. The thing is, a wandering mind can be a very powerful mind. It's some people will call it hyperfocus, and it seems to come in waves. It shows up in certain conditions. Sometimes these conditions feel magical, and it's hard to understand what brings it on. Even when you get there, there's this dark side to it. Other things get missed, and it can be a struggle to try to figure out how you got there, what to do with it. There's this natural rhythm that everybody seems to have, and you can share ideas of how to get there, but ultimately it comes to yourself to figure out, okay, what do I do to make these things happen? How do I be responsible with this sort of hyperfocus that I can get to? And whatever way you get there, it has to feel like you. It has to feel genuine. Often, something that has a very strong pull is a deadline, a sharp deadline, something at stake. And sometimes you might even procrastinate to get to that point on purpose, and that could even work. The trouble is that you can't schedule them yourself. They're dependent on other people. Your mind knows when it's a fake deadline. And deadlines don't line up with each other. They often crash into each other because they're coming from different points of agenda, different people. And they can be painful. Sometimes I even play around with the ideas. There's like some unconscious attempt to like punish yourself in this process. Who knows? I mean, it's just this sort of like there's this painful process that has to be there. Or maybe you get other people involved, a parent, spouse, friend. Sometimes this works too, particularly if there's mutuality involved, like a study group. You create some stakes in not wanting to let the others down if you don't show up. It can be very useful. I have a writing group, for instance, that I attend weekly, and that helps. For example, when I'm writing my newsletter, I like doing this sort of. It gives me a time. But there are scenarios where this doesn't work, and often this is more the case, where there's a relentless nature to it. One person says, "Do your homework," or some variation thereof, and the other says, "Not now." because their mind isn't there. And they don't know when their mind would be there or what it would take to get there, but it's definitely not there now. And so they say, okay, I'll do it later. And then effectively, that puts the onus right back on this person who's now effectively a taskmaster. And later might come, it may not come, and if the person remembers. So there's this back and forth that becomes attacking and blaming and resentment, and the relationship really, there's a lot of difficulty in that relationship. So maybe there's lists, the inbox, a bunch of different apps, systems of work. You kind of struggle one thing after the next trying to find something that works, and sometimes they fall apart, but sometimes they kind of work. And but when they really need to work, sometimes that's where it falls through the cracks and something gets missed. And so it's hard to know, could it have, like, what could you have done to kept it up to date? Because until that point, it doesn't feel honest, or it's not part of your systems to keep it that way. So it's hard to know what would have worked. And technology is very helpful in terms of, I mean, we wouldn't have this if we didn't have technology. And there are many ways that it can help, but there's also the infinite walls of distraction that I think we all know, the internet itself being a huge part of that. So setting up the barriers and trying to consider your environment and all that can be very important in this process. So what we're looking for is this ability to start and complete things on your own, hopefully without relying on a deadline, you know, having it under your own sense of agency. Maybe even do things that you don't want to do, but feel there's an importance in it. Perhaps to get to things that feel meaningful or enjoyable to you. Maybe you want to be able to confidently set things aside, so with a sense that you could reliably get to it, or feel that you have a way to manage distractions and think about how do you get back to things when you are distracted. Maybe feel that you can make your environment more helpful to you and without procrastinating, doing exactly that. And if you can do those things, then maybe you'd feel like you could start taking on things that would be more challenging even, or bigger projects, or things that you might enjoy at a larger scale. Things that would take several sessions to do, not just something that you have to do all at once. Because sometimes that hyperfocus itself can be exhausting. You know, if you do it, even if you have like several days in a row, particularly, I got to keep going, you know, and then you're just wiped afterwards. And that would be nice not to have to do that. So you could be able to set better goals, feel more on top of things. That's what we aim for here. Huge difficulty is with time. I often integrate time and attention together. I mean, these are, I think they're inseparable, and I want to write about that at some point, but anyway, I think they're very inseparable. It can be hard to remember to do things or bring them from your past to your present. It can be hard to stay with things in the present. It can be hard to know how long something will take, perhaps more so than most. It can be hard to know how long you've been in the middle of something and what's not being addressed as a result. You know, these things are on the sidelines. It can be hard to write tasks. Effectively, you're trying to make promises to yourself, you know, that you want to fulfill in the future, but you're stuck here in the present. What you're dealing with is this relationship between past you, present you, and future you. The trouble is, the sense isn't often that there is this past or future. It's much more that there's a now and a not now. And that's it. There's two times, now and not now. So as a result, these relationships are problematic. There's trouble in these relationships. In order to find the flow that would be reliable, you need to manage these relationships because they are how we deal with time. Okay, but what does that mean? First and foremost, it means honesty. It means you can't trick yourself. Tricking yourself in any way does not work for any long-term needs. This dishonesty erodes the relationships between self and present, future, and past. Pretending that your future self will be able to address something you've left over for now doesn't work either. But then how do you deal with things that you have to you want to take on later? Because, or how do you deal with things when you don't feel like it? You have to be honest with that feeling of, I don't feel like it. So the structuring way, the way I can structure this is that there's a care for future self, there's an honesty with present self, and there's an honor of past self. But before I get too new age, if you will, on you, there are practical ways of addressing these, of trying to make these things happen. And that's what I'm hoping to do. That's what the exercises will be about here. All right, so take a quick drink. Actually, before I get into this, maybe this is a good time to answer any questions. Is there any question at this point? Or I'll wait 10 seconds before I move on.
I haven't seen any hands up, Karush. So.
Okay, all right, I'll keep going. Thanks, Jeff. All right. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into what's called an anchor technique. Something came up with a few different names for it. I think anchor technique works best, and it's going to. You may have noticed I've got this metaphor of a sailboat, and so that's what I'm going to use that throughout the entire course. It's about using pen and paper in a way to help you to create your options and choose among them in a way that helps you to to choose your focus and give yourself a way to get back when you get distracted, and then not feel locked in as well, because present you here that decides what to do, and future you, even 10 seconds from now, has to have their own decision-making process. And then how do you correlate? How do you make those two work together in a way that's honest for both? The thing is, it centers on decision, which is the centerpiece of any worthwhile system. It's decision agency. That's what makes us human. I mean, it's or at least a huge part of what makes us human. And I think any system, any productivity system worth its salt has to start with this. Here we're pausing, we're reflecting and considering, what are my options? So second, we'll look at how to change direction. I originally called this stopping, but I don't think that's quite right. You want to be able to shift momentum. That dark side of flow that I was alluding to, that where you get into it and then you lose sight of everything else. We're going to use reminders. And I know many of you are like, I just brushed them off. We're going to try to figure out how to use reminders in a way that they can engage you, in a way that gives you the ability to shift momentum from one thing to the next, so that it's not just an abrupt crash and stop, so that it's not leaving chaos behind you, so that you have time to actually think to yourself, you're going to bargain at some point. Well, maybe I don't need to sleep that much, or I got whatever bargaining you want to give yourself that time and ability to. So we're starting to care for future self in this by creating and using that system, as well as we'll also think about small bits of organizing in this module too, because that's a part of the shifting momentum as well. Okay. Next, we're going to think about what it takes to get into work. First, we'll consider a lot of the things that maybe, you're already doing. Things like, how do you set your environment up, not only for managing distractions, but also for creating stimulation where it would be helpful. If you are able to set up the stimulation that you need to be able to direct your focus, then anyway, it'll help. Second, we'll consider the decisions that are involved in engaging work. It's not like you just shove yourself into work. I think oftentimes you can argue, all I need to do is just start. Often then there's that word just. it's a word that hides emotion. It's a word that it short circuits past the work of actually getting into something. So there's a series of decisions that you can take on to get into something, and in a way that is honest with yourself at each point, that lets you have that I don't want to sort of feeling and still decide, are you going to? If something's boring, if it's confusing, if it's overwhelming, all those things that you fear about it are still able to be at least addressed. Then we'll get into what we can call hard work. These are the things that you don't get into the flow on. These are hard to get into the flow on. They stir up negative feelings often. And so the question is how do you hear out those feelings? How do you use them? This is probably the most heady or I guess touchy-feely kind of something. But particularly when you're feeling overwhelmed or confused, it can be useful to have a useful set of tools to help you along the way. One of the things that we'll be doing throughout the course, and particularly here, I'd say, is trying to shift from having to try to do something because it's important, because often things being important isn't enough. It's just that's not enough, to being more of a puzzle, which can, when you know the piece, when you know what the pieces are of a puzzle, and like a sense of what the end goal is, suddenly there's that wandering mind often catches on to something. It might not be the puzzle of the work itself, but having a puzzle to work with that'll get you there sometimes lets you slip into that flow. So that's part of what we're going to try to do here. Then we're going to talk about more deliberately caring for future selves by learning ways of creating tasks. I've talked about this in several ways throughout my books and such, but here we're going to focus on the sense of honesty in promises that we make to ourselves, as well as how to make these more about invitations, because they have to be invitations, because our future selves, again, that part of ourselves that thinks that somehow in the back of our minds we can convince our future selves to do something, is we have to be able to say, no, that's not there. That future self has their own agency. They have their own decision. They have their own worlds that they're in. So the best I can do is make a really nice invitation. And what goes into that? How do we do that, so that if that doesn't work, what would our future selves do about it? Or if it does work, how can our future selves at least address it? All right. Next, we consider how to connect to our work over a period of time. Much of it is about how we honor our past selves. That part of us that wrote the task, how well did they do that invitation? And if they can, then we're in a better position to start honoring ourselves. This is very in tune with what I've talked about in terms of touching the keys. And I've talked about that many a time, and I often wonder if I've worn out the welcome on talking about it, but it's so important I keep talking about it. Basically, the sense of being able to touch on something regularly. And I try to address it from this point of view of honoring the past self. And what do we need to do in order to maintain our sense of agency now in that process? This section is also about creating lists in a way that works with, I didn't talk about this. So there's one of the issues of a wandering mind is often that the work table of mind is smaller. There's like a sort of myopia that goes there. There's often like a fast processing speed, like you can think fast, but the table on which you're working is kind of the smaller table. So how do you make it so that what you need is on that table? And so you minimize the decisions that are needed in creating the lists. And how do you do that in a way that leaves you not feeling exhausted? Yeah. And then lastly, we take on the inbox. I call this captaining the ship, because if you can take on the inbox, meaning if you can throw stuff at it, whatever's on your mind, and then reliably get stuff to where it best belongs. And where it best belongs means when and where you feel like you can address it, or that you have a sense of, I will not be able to address this and therefore it belongs over there, or I will might be able to address it and therefore it belongs over there, in a way that like you end up feeling like your mind is clear, at least for that moment. If you can do that, you're captaining the ship. You're basically you're able to address what's on your mind. You'll notice that I put this at the very end, which is in stark contrast with what a lot of systems do. A lot of systems say, let's do this up front. Let's learn about the inbox up front. But the trouble is that all those things that I just talked about, I think you need to have all those tools to be able to use the inbox well. You need to be able to decide to get to the inbox. You need to be able to slow things down and stop where you need to, so that you don't get too far into things. You need to be able to start getting into the inbox, especially if you're feeling it's this big ominous thing. You have to be able to stay with it, especially while it still is a big ominous thing. You have to be able to craft your messages well, because that's what you're doing with it. And you're going to have to be able to come back to it. So all of those sorts of ideas need to come together in order to captain the ship here. So overall, who is this for? This is if you're struggling with your attention, if you're constantly fighting yourself rather than finding flow, your relationships feel burdened in this process of trying to keep on track. You find flow, but you don't know how you got there. Inbox is constantly flooded, even though you've gone over this system and that system and trying to figure it out. You get into the flow of something and then lose track of other commitments. You fear taking on commitments. Nice example of this one is you've got something scheduled at 2 o'clock and it's now noon and you can't do anything until 2 o'clock. You just can't, for any number of, like, you don't want to get into it and fear, then it's always, anyway, that sort of idea. Essentially, you can't keep promises to yourself, that fear. You're open-minded about learning in an online setting, and I'll get into that in a moment. And you're willing to put in some time and effort to watch the lessons, engage in them, and practice the exercises that I'll be presenting. So, all right, I'll talk about the online nature of it in a second. But who am I? I think many of you know who I am. I sent out this invitation for this webinar only to my mailing list. So you guys are, first of all, you guys are awesome. So thanks for being awesome. But so I think you guys know who I am, but I'm going to say it. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a psychoanalyst. The psychiatrist part. That, in short, means I have studied the brain from a biological point of view, but also from a psychological point of view. I prescribe medications when and where it's helpful for clients that I'm working with in therapy. That's like the thumbnail sketch of it. Psychoanalyst is additional training I did. It's the broadest and deepest work of therapy that I think exists. It's all the other branches, all the other types of therapy branch off from it, essentially. They all have different focuses and what makes them work well, and they can often work hand in hand with like a more core psychoanalytic approach. But the center of that, and you're going to get a zillion different answers if you ask a zillion different psychoanalysts, but for me, it's that sense of agency and finding meaning. What things mean to you and being able to make clear decisions about what things mean to you. And thirdly, I've written a lot about task and time work in Omnifocus, or just without a task manager. I think probably I made my biggest name starting with Omnifocus, but I like the idea of how do I work with time and tasks. And then lastly, I've been a piano player for many years. I started at the age of 5. I haven't stopped. I haven't practiced today yet. So I have a keen sense of I think what creativity can be about. I write music. I write my newsletter, and I think a wandering mind, of which I count myself amongst the wandering minds. There's creativity in it. You know, there's a power to it, and it's how do you make that work together? So all of these things together, I thought, you know what, they kind of came together into this project here. These ideas have come from my work. I've engaged with individual clients. So, for example, somebody with ADHD comes to my office, or anxiety, they have a creative bent, whatever it is, and maybe I made a suggestion based on the material of what we're talking about. Hey, what about this? What about trying that? and if it doesn't work, then I have to go, okay, what about it doesn't work? And we talk about it. There's this iteration of bouncing back and forth that's kind of resulted with what is here in this project. And I think it's a continual iterative process, which is the way I work with everything. When we'd have this difficulty, it's okay. What's the difficulty? What's the frustration? What makes it okay? You weren't even able to try it. Okay, what happened there? So that's kind of like where I'm coming from. Okay, online setting. What's this about? I'm actually getting close to the end here, so maybe I'll just field all the questions at the end here. Hold on. What's interesting about having an online class? The other people involved. It's so much more engaging. There's an accountability, yeah. But there's also this living nature to it. There's other people learning at the same time, and that discussion between yourselves and me helps immeasurably, because your things that I might throw out there and ideas that I have, I will, as I grow, as I develop my own processes, I will inevitably develop blind spots. And so this helps tremendously in that process, where say somebody says, wait a second, what about this? And then everybody else goes, oh yeah, I don't understand that. Okay, fine. And then there's a set pacing to it where you have to be there in order to participate in that live setting. There's that accountability, that sense of like, okay, if I'm not there for the living nature of it, then I can watch the recording, but you do kind of lose something in that, I think. Still, I get it. I like recordings. I mean, most of what I've done has been books and recordings, so I don't knock them. But you also have moments to reflect, and as your questions form, you can ask them in real time. You can build on them while they're fresh. And then I have, as part of this, so the course will be a lot of exercises. I'll be asking questions, and so it won't be just me talking like I'm doing right now. I'll say, what about this? And then I'll ask your experiences of things and all that. And then the breakout rooms. But that way you can have moments to share your challenges, what's individually going on for yourselves. And then you might even have partial solutions or full solutions for somebody else. And then they might have them for you too. And the promptings of the work and the exercises that I give, the exercise that I give work to prompt a lot of those sort of discussions. And then a vital part of mastery is being able to return to the trunk, the roots, the basics, the fundamentals. The course, as I outlined it, like described all those, the 7 modules of the 7 core modules of content. I put them in order of difficulty and a building nature. You've probably seen this with any of the books or courses that I put together. One course I put together, Being Productive, that I make it so that they build. I start you with the most fundamental, and then I keep building. And what that does then is whenever you have difficulty in one section, you can always return below it. And then that makes the next section stronger and you're more able to return to it and develop it. So I've kind of designed it that way. And then in the forums, there's the private forum, where you'll all be able to talk to each other. You can talk to each other and figure out where the breakdowns have occurred, and then develop from there. And then because of that too, it sometimes, again, I'm speaking in generality, so please, if it doesn't apply to you, just never mind. But sometimes feelings of isolation, like when you have a creative mind and nobody gets it, and it's very hard to describe it. It's very hard to explain to others, like why you can only say, I'll do it later, and it doesn't work. That you have a group of like-minded folks who can oh yeah, I get it. There's a book that I liked, Peter Schenkman's Faster Than Normal. He wrote about ADHD. He talks in the introduction where he's like talking to somebody. I think it was his psychiatrist or something. I'm not sure who it was, but he was talking to somebody, and they were interrupting each other like back and forth, and they were totally cool with it. And anyway, it was a neat sort of way of describing it. So it's like this. So you get to minimize that isolation. You're on a path together. All right. I don't have any testimonials. I haven't launched the course yet. So anyway, but if you want to see like testimonials and such, my books, my courses, I think they've been well received. This is the URL for that, beingproductive.org/reviews. They all kind of have the same theme. They're all destinations to the same place. Creating flow with Omnifocus has been about using a task manager and just like the individual held kind of like, how do you put this together in order to get to this place? And Workflowmaster is the psychological, deep dive on it. And anyway, they're all kind of in the same direction. I think they've been similarly reviewed because I try to go to the same place. The sense of mastery and meaningful work is developed from this guided sense of, I call it play. And perhaps a wandering mind is just stronger at play. So that's maybe one way of looking at it. All right, I'm limiting seats. Okay, why am I doing that? This is an inaugural course. I want this to go well. I'm trying to make this, this is new for me. I'm trying to make this all go. But I also want there to be an intimate class this first time around. I want a feeling of connection because I want some sense of growth. It's an application process. It's not a hard application. It's like 4 or 5 questions, and you can answer like 1 sentence sort of things. But
Rush, we have a couple of questions.
You have a couple questions.
That just came in the chat. If you want to, yeah.
Please.
Brossington, go ahead with your question.
Oh, sorry, I just put it in the chat, but how is this course going to differ from Workflowmaster, your other course?
Great question. Okay. So Workflow, so there's a lot of overlap. I will say there is overlap. Workflow Mastery, I look at as the process of going from acknowledgement to separating out the individual steps of the session and the psychological ideas of dealing with error and creativity and mastery and play. Here, I'm looking at it from the point of view of distraction is much more strong. What do you do when, all right, so there's, I know a lot of people aren't hip to Freud, but I'm gonna invoke him. There's a metaphor that he liked to use that I liked a lot, which was of this part of us that is the natural part of us, the playful part of us, the wild part of us, id, if you will. There is no such thing as an id in the brain, but that's the metaphor, is very powerful or can be very powerful. And then there's this part of us that makes decisions. What do we do with that stuff? How do we manage that part of us that wants to goof off, that wants to say, I don't want to? That's our ego, right? And the way he talked about it is like you have the ego being rider and id being horse. And so I would say in the case of a wandering mind, the horse is more powerful than most. it is hard to ride this horse. So the question is, how do you start strengthening or learning how to guide that particularly powerful horse? Another analogy used, who used this analogy? I'm blanking. I'll say it anyway. I have it in the course and the correct attribution, but it's like it's like a Ferrari with bicycle brakes. So how do you deal with that situation? So that's the difference with workflow mastery. With being productive, this is probably closer to being productive in some ways because I structure it in similar ways. Where at the beginning you deal with decision, but I bring in inbox sooner there, and I bring in what else do I bring in? I bring in, I don't go into the idea of like managing lists in the way of like dealing with this sort of small work table of the mind. So once again, I'm dealing with that sort of strong, powerful, creative mind. And how do you guide that? So that, I don't know if that helps answer the question.
All right, Karush, thank you. A couple more questions. Good question. What does honoring the past self mean?
Good question. Okay. Honoring the past self. When you write down a task like exercise, and you're looking at it, and it's 9:30 at night, and you're sitting on your couch, how do you take that task that was written by you earlier, and you just don't want to do it? How do you say, you know what, I want to at least address this? How do I visit this in a way that feels like I paid attention to what I was thinking about at that time? And so that you don't just go, I'm not doing that. That's essentially what honoring past self is about.
All right. And Scott has a question for you.
Yes. You're muted. Oh, there you
Just
are.
wondering what time your classes will be held, what time of day, that sort of thing.
Good question. I'm probably going to get into some of these, but just I'll say, okay. 12:30 p.m. Central to 2 o'clock on Mondays and Thursdays, starting on September 27th, ending on October 22nd. I will also have a Friday Q&A session and implementation session at 12:30 Central until 1:30 Central. So there's a total of 12 sessions, and they all start at 12:30 Central on Monday, Thursday, Friday. All right, I'll continue. All right. So I kind of answered this one just now, but yeah, there's a total of 8 modules of content. The first one's an introduction, overlaps a lot of what I've talked about here, but I'll talk more about it in, there's also more of an orientation aspect of it, and dealing with the forum that you'll be dealing with, as well as where you would get the assignments. Excuse me. And then, yeah, 7 content stuff. There's 4 implementation sessions, and the forum is a private forum. That's where you get to hang out and talk together. I'll be participating there as well. Then this is the home base. Yeah, the classes start on the 27th. I will open it. Right now, there's just a area where you can sign up to the mailing list. I think you're all on it, because otherwise you wouldn't have gotten the invite to be here. But I will, at some point during the day on Sunday, I plan to replace that with an application. The application button will take you to, I'm working with a site called Maven, maven.com. They're the ones who are managing the emails I'll be sending back and forth. They'll be dealing with the payment aspect of it. and the application. So when you fill in questions, they'll go there. And then once you've filled in the questions, I'll admit, whoever. Generally,
So, Karush,
yeah.
Oh, I have another good question that you might help with. Someone says, I'm fairly happy with creating flow with Omnifocus and use principles you explained in being productive.
Yes.
I do get distracted, but not very often. Is this course for me?
Good question. So there's no way for me to guarantee and say yes or no, but I'll let me see if this helps. I mean, if you feel like you're pretty much on top of things, then no, probably not. I think this is if let's say you've read Creating Flow and you're like, I still can't manage to make things work. If the inbox, if you're working out, if you find yourself working out of the inbox where things keep collapsing, or if so in Creating Flow, I talk about a navigation system. If that isn't holding together for you, or if you haven't been able to adapt something for yourself that you feel like you can get things off your mind, then yeah. But if for the most part you're on top of things, no, I wouldn't say this is for you. Yeah.
Okay, another one for you. Well, it's a statement. It's like, I don't need another tool. I need to know how to apply the tools and how my brain works, ADHD, anxiety, and the vicious cycle that goes with it.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do here. The tools you'll be using are pen, paper, calendar, and a reminder. That's it. So similar to the Being Productive course I put together. Tools are useful. They're great. I like I use the ones I've written about are Omnifocus and DevonThink, and they are, I think, often considered the more involved tools. Lots of bells and whistles and things that you can manage. But it starts with you. It starts with where you are. And, so for example, in one of the modules I described, like the ones where you're getting started, you're talking about setting up your environment, and that part of that might be, your task system or something like that. But in the next module after that, where I talk about hard work, that's where you're dealing with, the distractions in your head. And that's you can't put those somewhere. You can't just say, okay, you stand over there. You can kind of, you put it in the inbox, but if you don't have a working inbox, now what? So the tools are mental tools.
Excellent. Question, would it be helpful to go through Being Productive before attending this course?
Wouldn't hurt. Go for it if you like. You don't have to. Being Productive. So Being Productive, I made that one with the deliberate sense that it could be viewed multiple times. So if you, when you get to the end of it and you come back to the beginning and maybe you choose a different project. So the way Being Productive is designed is you choose a project around which you build your system. And you can use the course with different projects and kind of like hone the system as you go. And you should hopefully discover new things each time you go through it, or at least for the first 2, 3, 4 times you go through the course. If you don't, then I failed at that, but I think you should. So if you've gone through it once, I would encourage, go for it again. But that's kind of how I made it. You know what? Another way to distinguish this is if you can't make it through Being Productive. And because I've had a number of people say, I've got to lecture 5 and that's all I can do. And somehow I dropped it. Somehow I couldn't keep going, or whatever it is. Then this might be a good course. The ways of focus might be helpful there.
Okay, I got another question and comment.
Yep.
So will the course still be Omnifocus setup friendly? I feel having a more robust system like that would be very supportive. And that's one of the areas I had been struggling in. Managing it by pen and paper has gotten massively overwhelming. This
will not conflict with that. I use Omnifocus all the time. And I use the principles in this course myself all the time. It would not conflict. I think there might be points where you have to translate things, but I don't think it's far. Like I'll talk about one like ways. So like the navigation system I described there. I talk about that in pen and paper, but you can create that in Omnifocus. And I think time willing, I would either direct you to where to see that in creating flow, or I might have some discussion about that in the forum. Problem is I don't want to alienate people who haven't. I got to think about that, but it works with it. I wouldn't say that they're at all at odds.
All right, thank you. And a big question probably everyone's wondering is, what is the cost?
$1,125. I feel like I should follow that up with something, but I just want to come out straight and say that's what it costs. I could say a little bit. It's markedly different in price than anything else I've charged. The highest that I've charged was very briefly for being productive. I went to $250 and then I went back down to $50. But the work that's involved in this, the time that's involved in this, and the costs that are involved in this are high. And to make this work, you could think of it as working in individual therapy with me would cost you a lot more. Working in group therapy with me would cost you a lot more. Now, this isn't therapy, but I think there's a lot of overlap in where this can work in that regards. So I guess that's one thing I could say. I aim not to step on any toes of any therapists, of anybody who's, people have therapists and are working with them. So this would not in any way, I hope, conflict.
All right, excellent question. Will we continue to have access to any resources or content?
You should, yeah. What I'll do is I'm going to record the sessions and then post them. I've got to figure out what to do in the case that, let's say I decide not to do this in the future. I think I'm going to keep doing this, but let's see how it goes. But if for whatever reason this shuts down, I will think about how to get the recordings to you and that sort of thing. The forums, on the other hand, I wonder how that would work. But my intention would be that, yeah, you get to hang on to the stuff.
And I'm going to combine these two questions. How many apps do you plan on accepting, and class size? What will it be?
Applications, just whatever. Throw the applications my way. The class size is I haven't definitively said, but I think I'm aiming at 20. And I'm aiming at 20. If it's less than that, I think fine. If they're more than that, I think I got to limit it just to make sure that this goes well. So probably if the earlier your application goes in, the better chance. And then, once it hits 20, I'm stopping it. Or if it doesn't hit 20, I'm going to stop it on a week later at, was that the 19th or the 20th, something like that. I'll turn off the applications because I need time to kind of set things up for the course.
That's it for now on questions.
That's it for questions. Wow. So I totally, there we go. Take this thing off here. So yeah, that hit the end there. Let me. So I think that's it. We actually pretty much nailed the time frame here. I think pretty close. Thank you everybody for being here. I hope I was able to answer. Sounds like I was able to answer your questions. And if you join me on this, I'd be excited to have you. I don't know what else to say.
Kurosh, got this opportunity to be able to talk to you directly, and wanted to say a big thank you for all the material that we have gone through, which you have written and published at Gumroad. So didn't want to lose this opportunity to say a big thank you to you.
Oh, Manu, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah. I know it's cliche to say, but it's absolutely true. I couldn't do it without you. I mean, like I started with, a few posts and then creating flow with Omnifocus. And there was a lot of people, like all of you, who said like, "Hey, this is really good." I was like, "Oh, wow, this is exciting." And so, and then every time, you gave me more confidence to like say, "Okay, maybe I got a thing that people will like." So I go out there and I make another thing. So, but you're absolutely welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
One last question, Karush. Can we squeeze one in?
Yeah, please.
Are you planning on continuing or producing other material, books, self-paced courses, even on material covered in waves of focus, or will you primarily be focused on waves of focus for the immediate future?
Good question. Can't guarantee anything. There is a degree to which I lock into something, and a degree to which I don't, like, especially when I'm done with a project. I think without exception, I have in mind, I'm going to do this next, while I'm writing a book, while I'm writing, being productive, whatever it is, I'm like, this is the thing I'm going to do next. And almost without exception, I go in a different direction. So why that is, that's for me and my unconscious to figure out. But I can tell you my intention is, I want to do this at least once, maybe a couple times, maybe even a few times before I entertain the idea of turning it into a book or a course like Being Productive. Reason being, I want to allow it that further iterative approach and see what else I can build with it before I commit it to something that is static. That's one thought. Other thoughts. I know Omnifocus is playing with Omnifocus 4, at least with iOS, and I can only imagine if they've got it for their Mac OS system somewhere down the line. So that might be something I'm thinking about. I've got a lot of music projects that I really want to focus on. I haven't done a synthesizer-based one in a while, and I'm chomping at the bit on that one. And I've got to finish the Moonlight Sonata third movement, which is, oh man, it's 18 pages. So anyway, I don't know how much of that you really want to know. So I think see, case in point, I have a wandering mind. Let me go back to your chat question. Here we are. All right. I hope to do something because I know I like books. I like the online course. I like being able to do things at my own pace for the very reason that I sometimes feel like I might lose my way on something here or there. So I'm fond of them, but just for that reason, I want to see how I can iterate on this to eventually get it somewhere.
I think that covers it.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.